Okay, good evening. We're continuing with Masechta Shabbos 146, chapter 22, and the name of the chapter is Chavit, cask. We'll start with the Mishnah. Shever Odom is Hechovis Lechol Hemeno Gurgorois. A person may break open a cask in order to eat dried figs from it. Is clear, provided that he does not intend to make a vessel. And one may not perforate the hung of a cask. The bung of a cask.
Yeah.
This is reminding me like opening a can on Shabbos.
Right.
If your intention is to make a kli, it's a problem. If your intention is just to get the content out of the
I remember back
can,
in the day that if you had it,
it would make a hole in the bottom.
Right.
One may not perforate the bung of a cask. I guess the bung means the bottom.
No, I don't know. Hold on. Let's see what. Go to 9. These words are.
These are the words of Rabbi Menashe. However, the sages.
Number 9.
The sages permit it. See number 9. Number 9, it says, Megufa bung was a clay stopper molded to the mouth of the cask. Rabbi Yehuda maintains that it is forbidden to make a hole in the bung, for in so doing he is making a proper opening to the cask, and thereby transgresses the malacha of striking the final blow. If he wishes to open the cask on Shabbos, he should instead do so by removing the entire bung. In so doing, he merely reopens a previously made opening, which is not a transgression, since he has not fashioned anything new. So the bung over here, it says that it's a clay stopper molded to the mouth of the cask. So not to create a new hole. The sages says it's not a problem to do it. And everyone agrees that one may not perforate it in its side. Now, if the cask was already perforated and one wished to plug the hole, he may not place wax upon it, because he thereby smooths it. Smooth it. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, these are the words of Rabbi Yehuda. Maaseh bo lifnei Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai ba'arov, an incident involving one who placed wax to plug a hole once came before Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai in the town of Arab ve'omar, and he said, Choshishani lo mechatos, I fear on his account that he may be liable for chatos offering. But the Gemara Amar Yeshaya lo yishonu ela drusis, the Mishnah permits to break open a barrel, and in particular to handle a sword or knife. For this purpose was taught only with reference to a cask full of pressed figs. In that case, the person will need the knife or sword anyway to cut apart the fig casks after the fig cakes after removing them, and he is therefore permitted to handle the cutting implement, even to break the cask. But to break apart a cask of loose figs, one may not handle a knife or sword on the Shabbos. This interpretation is questioned. But is it really so that regarding loose figs, the permit does not apply? They challenge this, citing the following advice. Rabbi Gamliel says, maybe a person may bring a cask of wine and sever its top with a sword, and place it before his guest on the Shabbos. And he need not be concerned that he may be desecrated, that he may have desecrated the Shabbos. Evidently, then it is permissible to use a sword to puncture a cask, even when one will not be using the same implement to cut apart the produce in the cask. The Gemara replies, this Baisa reflects the view of the sages, whereas our Mishnah reflects the view of Rabbi Nechemia. And what forced Rabbi Menashe to construe our Mishnah according to the view of Rabbi Menashe over Druses, and is dealing with pressed figs in particular, let him interpret it as dealing even with loose figs and as following even the sages. Rava said the wording of our Mishnah posed a difficulty for him. Why did the Mishnah teach that the cask contained figs, in particular litnei peiros? Let it instead teach that it contained produce of any kind. Rather, we can infer from here that the Mishnah is dealing with pressed produce, something that needs to be cut apart in order to be consumed. The Gemara cites another instance of contradictory rulings. Thank you. Gemara cites another instance of contradictory rulings that can be resolved by attributing one ruling of Rabbi Menashe and the other of the sages. Tanya Chad. One Brisa teaches one may untie ropes binding baskets of dried figs or dates, or he may unravel these ropes or cut them. However, another Brisa teaches he may untie the ropes, but he may not unravel or cut them. Now, meaning destruction would be okay, but unraveling them would be a problem. Now, it would appear that these teachings are contradictory. It's two opinions. One is the view. The first is the view of the sages, and the second, the latter one, represents the view of Nehemiah. Even a spoon, a cloak, or a knife, may be handled on Shabbos only for their specialized use. The Mishnah had stated that one may sever with a knife or sword the top of a cask on the Shabbos so long as he does not intend to make a proper opening. The Gemara poses a related query. They inquired of Rav Sheshes, what about thrusting into the side of a cask with a spear on the Shabbos? Is one permitted to open a cask in this way or not? The Gemara amplifies the two sides of the question. Do we say that the person intends to make a new opening in the cask and therefore his act is forbidden? Or perhaps we say that he intends only to allow the wine to flow out generously and his act is therefore permitted? Rav Sheshes replies, Rav Sheshes said to them, it can be presumed that he intends to make an opening and therefore it is forbidden. They challenged the ruling of Rav Sheshes from the previously cited Brisa, which states, Rav Gamliel says, maybe a person may bring a cask of wine, and sever its top with a sword. If severing with a sword is permitted, why should puncturing with a spear be forbidden? What's the difference between a sword and a spear? Also, there, in the case of a sword, it is certain that he intends only to facilitate a generous flow of wine. Here, however, in the case of the spear, if it were so that he intends only to facilitate a generous flow, let him simply open the cask by taking off the bung, this clay cover. Rather, since he instead uses his spear to puncture a new hole, it is evident that he intends to create yet another opening for the cask.
Yeah, but before he said that he couldn't mess with the bung, I don't understand. So now
according to the rabbis, he's allowed to. There's two opinions. Yeah. The Mishnah says that according to the rabbis, Chachamim matirin. Chachamim says it's okay. Rabbi Yehuda says not to.
Okay.
But you got the difference between the spear and the sword?
Well, you're putting a hole in the cask. You're making a new hole.
But in the
and the other one you're cutting off the top.
With a sword, he says he just wants to facilitate a generous flow.
Right.
But with a spear, it's obvious that he's trying to make a new opening. Otherwise, he would just open it regular. One may not perforate the bung of a cask. These are the words of Rabbi Yehuda. The Mishnah went on to say that the sages permit this. Yet both the sages and Rabbi Yehuda agree that one may not perforate it in its side. So the Gemara now explains the ambiguous phrase. There's a machlekes between Rabbi Yehuda and the rabbis only in the top of the bung, but not the side. Everyone agrees that it is forbidden. And this indeed is what the Mishnah means when it teaches in the name of both Tanoim. And one may not perforate it in its side. Another Omar, however, explained the Mishnah differently. Rav Chisda says, the dispute between the Tanoim concern perforating the side of the bung. But as for the top of the bung, everyone agrees that making a hole there is permitted. And as for that which the Mishnah teaches, according to everyone, one may not perforate it in its side. Also, begufo de chavis, there it refers to making a hole in the body of the cask, not in the cap. In the above discussion, it is clear that perforating the body of a cask is forbidden according to all Tanoim. The Gemara now discusses this law in greater detail. One may not make a hole in a vessel on the Shabbos. However, if one comes to merely to enlarge an already existing hole, he may enlarge it. Some say that one may not enlarge a hole. But all agree that it is altogether permissible to reopen an old hole. The Gemara questions why the first Tana permits enlarging an existing hole. Tana Kama, and according to the Tana Kama, why may one not make a new hole on the Shabbos, the Komisak in Pischo, because in so doing one is fashioning an opening in the vessel, which in fact finishes off construction of the vessel. But the same can be said for enlarging an opening. For enlarging an opening too. In enlarging an existing hole, one is also fashioning an opening in the vessel. The Gemara replies, actually, as a matter of biblical law, any opening that is not made for the purpose of bringing things in, as well as taking things out, Eino Pesach, is not deemed a true opening, and one is not liable for its creation. So in order to be liable, what they're really saying, Tumar is telling us, in order to be liable for making an opening, and it's to be an opening for bringing things in and bringing things out. And if not, if it's just one-way street, it's not considered a Pesach, it's not considered an opening, and one is not going to be liable for its creation. And the rabbis who decreed against creating other kinds of opening on account of the case of chicken coop. What's the story with chicken coop? In which a hole is made to bring air in and take harmful vapors out.
It can stink a lot in a chicken coop.
And hence the Tana rightfully rules and if one comes to enlarge an already existing hole, he may enlarge it. For certainly as far as enlarging is concerned, no one will come to enlarge the hole in a chicken coop. Why? Why no one would come to enlarge the hole?
You need 2 holes.
No, because you don't want to run away. You don't want predators to come and take them.
Yes, that's what it says, the creepy crawlers, as you would say.
What's the problem with creepy crawls? The chicken would eat them. No?
The next
Because of the threat of creeping things. See, an enlarged hole would allow predators such as rat and weasels to enter the coop. As such, even if one were mistakenly reasoned that enlarging an opening in a chicken coop were permissible, few people would in practice ever wish to do such a thing. This being the case, there was no need to decree against enlarging one-way opening, and the position of the Tanna Kama is that no such decree was in fact made. And some say, so we're holding in 146b1. Some others say one may not enlarge a hole on the Shabbos. Sometimes one does not properly adjust the size of the chicken coop's opening when he originally builds it, and therefore he might later come to enlarge it. If he were to do so on Shabbos, he would transgress a biblical prohibition. Therefore, the sages prohibited the enlargement of any hole on the Shabbos. Rav Nachman lectured in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, the law follows the some who say, by rabbinic decree, one may not extend any existing hole on the Shabbos. The Gemara elaborates on the last teaching of the earlier cited Baisa. The Baisa had stated, but all agree that it is altogether permissible to reopen an old
plugged hole.
To reopen an old hole. They taught this that one may reopen a plugged hole only if the plugged hole was in a place where it was meant to preserve the aroma of the wine. But if it was in a place where it was meant to strengthen the cask, also it is forbidden to remove the plug. What is an example of a plug whose purpose is to preserve? And what is an example of plug meant to strengthen? If the plugged hole is above the level of the wine in the cask, this is a plug meant to preserve the wine's aroma. If, however, it is below the surface of the wine, this is a plug meant to strengthen the cask. When the plugged hole is below the surface of the wine, this too is a plug meant just to preserve. And what is the example of a plug meant to strengthen? A case where, for example, the cask has been punctured at the very bottom, just below the level of the dregs, and it was here that the cask had been plugged. A Baisa taught a ruling that supports you. Baisos, the owner of a house whose entrance to a courtyard was sealed, which is entitled to 4 amos in front of the entrance when the courtyard is divided, as if the entrance was still open. However, he tore down the door's frame when he sealed the entrance. He is not entitled to 4 amos, for when the frame was removed, the entrance ceased to exist, and the owner lost his right to this area in the courtyard. Likewise, a house with a corpse inside, whose entrance is sealed, does not render tome. One who approaches within 4 amos of it from all sides. If, however, one tore down the frame of the door and thereby sealed the house permanently, the house does render tome anyone who approaches within 4 amos of it from all sides, for the house is accorded the status of a closed grave. Now, in both these cases, we see that an opening loses its status as such only when it has been permanently and completely sealed off. This supports Rava's claims that only the strongest of all seals, i.e. a plug, in the very bottom of a cask legally eliminates the opening it had plugged. So having discussed enlarging the opening of cask on the Shabbos, the Gemara considers the permissibility of other ways of enhancing opening on the Shabbos. Guvta, as concerns placing a spigot in an existing hole in a wine cask. In page 146b2, Rav Osar, Rav forbids it, Ushmuel Shore, Shmuel permits it. Mechatech lechatchila, initially cutting a reed to serve as a spigot, Chulam lepligid, also everyone agrees is forbidden. Adure, and putting an already trimmed reed back into the barrel after it has fallen out, the Chulam lepligid the shori, everyone agrees that it's permissible. Keep pligid the chasicha mitakno, when they disagree, is concerning a reed that has already been cut to serve as a spigot, but has not been perfectly trimmed. Manda also, the one who forbids placing the spigot in the hole, holds gazrinan dilmos lemichtechatchila, that the rabbis issued a decree forbidding this last one to come to cut the reed in the first place. Uman the shori, and the one who permits it maintains that le gazrina, the rabbis did not issue such a decree. The Gemara observes that this Amoreg dispute apparently mirrors a Tanoic dispute. Ketanoi, it is the following dispute between Tanoim. Ein choischim shveferet b'yom tov. On Yom Tov, one, we may not cut a tube to serve as a spigot for a cask. And it goes without saying that it is forbidden to do so on Shabbos. No fluid machzir oiso b'Shabbos. However, the tube fell out of its hole in the cask, we may return it to its place on the Shabbos. It goes without saying that we may do so on Yom Tov. Rabbi Yeshua Maker, Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Yoshia Maker rules leniently. Rabbi Yoshia Ahayo, concerning which part of the Baisa did Rabbi Yeshua state his leniency? If you say concerning the beginning of the Baisa, he permits trimming the spigot to fit the hole, akamisak and mono, is perfecting a vessel. It is inconceivable that Rabbi Yoshayo would permit it. Ela Sefer, rather, we will say that Rabbi Yoshayo stated his leniency concerning the end of the Baisa. He permits putting the spigot back into the hole if it falls out, without fitting it. However, gives rise to a difficulty. Tana Komanami Mishra Kashori, the Tana Kama also permits putting the spigot back. What then is the difference between them? Rather, it must be that the difference between them arises in a case where the tube has already been cut to serve as a spigot, but has not yet been perfectly trimmed. One master, the Tanakama, holds that the sages issued a decree forbidding the placement of the tube in the hole. Whereas the other master, Rabbi Yeshaya, holds that the sages did not issue such a decree. We thus find that the dispute between Rav and Shmuel is indeed mirrored by a Tanoic dispute. Dorosh Rav Sheisho B'rei de Rav Idi Mishmet Rabbi Yochanan Halacha Rabbi Yeshaya. The halacha in this matter follows the view of Rabbi Yeshaya. One may place a tube in a barrel for use as a spigot, even if it has not yet been trimmed to perfectly fit the hole. Now, if the cask was already perforated and one wished to plug the hole, he may not place wax upon it. Mishcho Rav Osa, thick oil to plug a cask. Rav prohibits this on Shabbos. Shmuel Shori, Shmuel permits it. Manda Osa Gazim Shum Shaiva, Rav is forbidding it, prohibits it. Maintains the sages issued a decree against using oil in this way because of wax. And the one who permits it maintains that the sages did not issue such a decree. The Gemara cites a different report of Rav's position on this matter. Amar li Rav Shmuel bar Chana Rav Yosef. Shmuel bar Chana said to Rav Yosef, you explicitly told us in the name of Rav that using thick oil in this way is permitted. The Gemara discusses another law relating to the extraction of wine from a cask on the Shabbos. Omar Tovus Rishba Shmuel, Tovus Rishba said in the name of Shmuel, that practice of placing a myrtle leaf into the hole in a cask is forbidden. My time, Rav Yemo Medifti says, a decree was issued because of making a gutter. That's why the practice of placing myrtle leaf into a hole in a cask is forbidden. A decree was issued lest one pluck the leaf. My benayu, what is the practical difference between these two views? Whether a decree because you're making a gutter or decree because one plucked the leaf. So Ika benayu, the ktiu manche, difference between them, it arises in a case where leaves have already been plucked and placed in readiness before the onset of the Shabbos. Then the issue would be because of the decree. If you say the issue because of plucking the leaf, there's no concern because the leaves are already plucked. Beis Adya, concerning felt padding, Rav also Shmuel Shor, Rav prohibits one to wrap himself with this cloth and transport it through a public domain. Shmuel permits this. Berakin, concerning length of soft felt, Dishrei. Everyone agrees that it's permissible with a soft one. Bekoshin, concerning length of stiff felt, everyone agrees that it's prohibited. Keep where they disagree concerning cloth of intermediate texture. It's not too hard, not too soft. The one who prohibits, Rav, argues that someone wrapped in cloth of intermediate texture looks like he is carrying a burden. Shmuel maintains that it does not look like he is carrying a burden, and therefore it's permissible. And that which Rav purportedly ruled here was not stated explicitly by him, but rather was stated as an inference by someone who observed his behavior. The incident through which Rav's ruling was inferred occurred as follows. It once happened that Rav came to a certain place where there was not enough room for everyone to sit. So he left the house and sat in an adjacent Carmelis, which we said it's an area that it's not a public domain and it's not a private domain. Rabbinically prohibited to transport items from private to public. Likewise, it is rabbinically prohibited to traverse 4 amas in a Carmelis while carrying something. So Aslabe Sadio, the students then brought him some length of felt padding to sit upon. Lo Yosef, but he did not sit upon them, but rather seated himself directly upon the ground. Someone who observed Rav concluded that the reason Rav did not sit on the material, this padding, felt padding, was because that he maintained that carrying felt padding from domain to domain is forbidden, even if one wears it like a robe. However, it is not actually so. For indeed, it is on record that Rav publicly declared that wearing felt padding to be permissible, and it was only out of difference of honor for the other rabbis that he did not sit upon it. There were other rabbis present who did not have cushions and were sitting on the ground. Out of respect for them, Rav declined the cushion and sat on the ground along with them. Umaninu, and who was there? Who was the other rabbis whom Rav wished to show difference, to show honor? Rav Kahana v'Rav Asi. It was Rav Kahana and Rav Asi. A new Mishnah. So 146 before, one may place a cooked dish in a cool, dry pit in order that it may be preserved. And one may put good water into stale water in order that it cools off. And one may put cold water in the sun in order that it become warm. One whose outer garments fell in water while traveling may continue to walk in them and need not fear that people will suspect him of having laundered his clothes on the Shabbos. When he arrives at the outermost courtyard, he may spread them out in the sun in order to dry them. But he may not do so in front of people. The Mishnah had stated that one may place a cooked dish in a cool dry pit in order to preserve it. The Gemara questioned the necessity to even teach this. Pshita. This is obvious. Why must it even be stated? Ma'ud Tema, were it not for the Mishnah's teaching, you might have said, Nigzar Mishum Ashvuye Gumis, the sages would have decreed against this practice because of the fear that one will smooth out depressions in the bottom of the pit in order to place the dish on level ground. Kamashmal, and the Mishnah therefore informs us that no such decree was made. And one may place good water into stale water to cool it off. Gemara says it's obvious. Why would there be any reason to forbid this practice? Pshita, the Gemara replies that the teaching is indeed obvious, but was included as a preface to the next point the Mishnah makes. The second clause of the Mishnah, which makes the converse point, is the necessary one. It states, and one may put cold water in the sun in order that it will become warm. Hanami Pshita, the second teaching is also obvious. Why might one think that warming something in the sun is impressionable? You might have said, we ought to make a decree prohibiting the placement of water in the sun, lest one come to perform the similar act of burying food in warm ashes. The latter being clearly prohibited. Kamashmulan, the Mishnah therefore teaches us that no such decree was made, and it's permissible to place cold water in the sun. The Gemara quotes the next part of the Mishnah, Mishin Nishru v'chulu, one whose garments fell in the water while traveling may walk in them and need not fear. The Gemara cites an Amoraik ruling apparently inconsistent with our Mishnah. Wherever the sages prohibited an act because they were concerned it might give the appearance of wrongdoing, the act is prohibited even in one's most private chambers. Tanan, we'll learn, however, in our Mishnah, we may spread them out in the sun in order to dry them. But he may not do so in front of people. Why does the Mishnah permit spreading out the cloth in private, if in public this is forbidden because of the appearance of wrongdoing? Evidently, private performance of such an act is permissible, contrary to Rav's teaching. The Gemara says, Tanoi, in fact, this point is the subject of a Tanoic dispute. The Tanya. It was taught in a bais, you may spread them out in the sun, but not in front of people. Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, however, Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon rule that this is prohibited even in a secluded area. Rav then rules in accord with Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon, who prohibits spreading out the cloth even in private. Ravuna said, one who shakes his cloak on the Shabbos so as to clean it is liable to chatos. So the number one, he shakes the dust off his cloak. In doing so, he makes the garment cleaner and perform a tolda, a derivative of the labor of laundering, melaben, whitening. Tosfos dispute Rashi, arguing that legally speaking, one cannot launder without the use of water. They therefore assert that in our case, dew had been on the person's cloak, and it was to remove these droplets that the person shook the garment. Also, Rashi to state that water is required for the labor of laundering. He states this, however, concerning a garment that has been soiled by mud, where simply rubbing the caked mud off the garment will not remove the underlying stain. In the case of a garment that is simply dusty, the rubbing or shaking can clean it effectively, and this is therefore prohibited as an act of laundering.
Okay, what about snow?
Snow.
You're in, New England and Boston, Shabbos, you got the snow on you.
So I think halachically, if we're speaking about halacha l'maaseh, like what do you do? So I remember that in Shulchan Aruch there was a big difference between the materials that your coat is made from. If the coat is made of plastic
Or leather.
or something that is absorbent or not something that is absorbent. So it makes a big difference what type of a garment it is.
Okay.
Ruchim to you.